Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our Six Lakes Deep Community Update webinar this evening. We're really pleased to have a couple of members of Deep's remediation team here to talk about the project at Six Lakes, what we hope will someday be Six Lakes Park. My name is Kathy Sepiel. I'm the Land Protection Manager for Connecticut at Save the Sound, and I'm really pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Six Lakes Park Coalition. And now I'd like to introduce Hamden Mayor Lauren Garrett, who'd like to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. So I really enjoy working with Save the Sound, and I'm so glad that there is a big group of advocates who are making sure that we are getting regular updates from Deep. We are doing cleanups over at Six Lakes and really making sure that we have, we're staying on top of this piece of property so that it can one day be a state park. So thank you to Save the Sound for doing that work. And I really appreciate what Deep is doing and making sure that Olin is remediating the property. But one of our longtime advocates, Justin Farmer, has for a very long time been advocating for Six Lakes to become a park and get returned to the community, and now is formally working with Save the Sound. So Justin, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Garrett. Also just want to acknowledge that Councilor Caldwell is here with us. Good to always see you and be in community. So as the mayor has mentioned, we've been working with DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and their role as the regulator is to oversee the remediation of this project. So I'll introduce Mark Lewis and John Duff. Mark Lewis is the supervising environmental analyst at DEEP's Remediation Division. He was on the Brownfields coordinator from 2014 to 2022, and he was his predecessor of the Permitting Enforcement and Remediation Division from 93 to 2014. Mark previously worked in environmental consulting, asset remediation, and contaminated properties as land surveyor and a hydraulic technician for the U.S. Geology Survey. And Mark is also a longtime member of DEEP's Connecticut Interstate Fire Crew, which is responsible to wildfires throughout the United States. We also are joined with John Duff, who is an environmental analyst in DEEP's Remediation Division, who is assigned and managed to the Olin Pine Swamp, also known as the Powder Farm, or as we love to call it, Six Lakes. John previously worked in DEEP's underground storage cleanup program. So we're going to have these two dynamic individuals tonight about the efforts going on at Six Lakes, and hopefully we'll have time at the end, about 15 minutes, to answer people's questions. So I'll pass it over to you, Mark.
Well, thanks, Justin, for the very kind introduction. And just to get technical stuff out of the way, I'm going to try sharing my slides right now. Well, first of all, like I said, thank you very much. And we really appreciate the opportunity to share with you the work that's being done right now out of the Pine Swamp / Olin Powder Farm site to continue the investigation. And John, if you would take it away, please. John is the person that has been overseeing this investigation and is best qualified to speak to what's currently happening at the site.
Good evening, everybody. My name is John Duff. I am an analyst with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Much like what we were saying, I've been here for quite a while, and I'm the one assigned to the Pine Swamp location, and I've been working with Olin, I'm going to say closely, for probably the past 5 years to get the site properly investigated and remediated, and I guess we'll go from there. Sound good? All right, Mark, you can change to the next slide. So tonight's on the agenda for the slide deck. I'm going to go over pretty quickly a little bit of the site background, the past investigative work that's happened at the Olin property or the Pine Swamp property. And then, go over quickly the 2025 scope of work and the 25 schedule. Next slide. So right here is an aerial photograph of the Pine Swamp property that we're talking about. It's a privately owned location consisting of about 102 acres. Approximately 50% of it is consistent with, it consists of about, is the pond system, makes up about half the property. They're in a connected pond system that eventually discharges out to the Lake Whitney area. The surrounding areas to the Pine Swamp property consists of neighboring mix of commercial, industrial, and residential and municipal locations. Next slide. So a bit about the background is that the Pine Swamp location was acquired by the Winchester Repeating Arms Company back between 1889 and 1915 from the New Haven Water Authority. It is a bunch of smaller properties that were combined to make it what it is today. The site history for the early to mid 1900s, the site was primarily used for the storage of gunpowder for the manufacturing of munitions by the Winchester Company. The gunpowder was stored in a series of approximately 30 brick bunkers that were scattered across the property. I'm going to show you the locations of those bunkers, or the approximate location of the bunkers, later on in the slide deck. The site was also used for test firing munitions in a shooting range. And then it was also used for the disposal of manufactured waste, primarily from the New Haven facility operated by Winchester. And some of the areas were designated for burning of the waste. In 1966, the Hamden Department of Public Health ordered a cessation of the burning and dumping at the property. And then in 75, all of the bunkers that were storing the gunpowder, as well as remaining structures on the property, were demolished. Next slide. Looking at the investigation and remediation history of the property, investigation beginning in the mid 1980s, but it wasn't until 1986 that the department became formally involved with the Olin Corporation by way of entering into the consent order. Now, this consent order required Olin to basically, investigate and then remediate like 5 specific areas of concern or known contamination. After the signing of the consent order, the late 80s primarily consisted of additional investigative work, but it wasn't until the 1990s that some of the remedial actions occurred, mostly in the form of excavation and removing contaminated materials from the site. As you can see from the timeline, there's quite a gap between the 1990s and 2014. 2014 is when the department requested that Olin restart their uncompleted environmental actions at the property. So that period of time, Olin was focusing their efforts on the New Hall project, which is also in Hamden. So since that was a greater concern, they focus all their efforts dealing with the New Hall neighborhood. So then after 2014, there's also another gap in time, and evidently, I guess there was some additional work that needed to be done in a New Hall neighborhood that was very pressing. So they focused their efforts again on a New Hall neighborhood. So then in 2020, the department again prompted Olin to restart their activity. And then Olin placed focus on the property by reviewing a considerable amount of historical data, because that's what we're pretty much asking them to do, is to go through their historical data on the property. And then from there, Olin developed a 2023 work plan to reestablish the current site conditions through investigation. Many of the areas identified in many of the areas that were identified in 1986 consent order. Next slide. So we're going to be entering in the areas of concern and the potential release areas. So just to show you again, this is an aerial photograph of the Olin property. You can see that these are the 5 primary areas of concern that are known to be contaminated, and which were part of the 1986 consent order. You can see that majority of these known areas of concern are either located to the southern portion of the property or along the eastern edge. Next slide. Other areas of concern, in addition to the 5 known areas of the consent order, Olin, through their review of historic records and visual observations, have also identified numerous other potential release areas. So in these areas, they may not necessarily be impacted, yet require some level of investigation to either include them with the known areas of concern or to no longer consider them as an outstanding issue. So you can see from the slide that visually there was identified a wet well in the northern portion of the property. You have the target areas and machine gun mounts. The brick bunkers aren't on this slide, but they will be in the next couple of slides. They found a concrete block footing from a building that used to be there that needs to be further investigated, and then just other areas identified as demolition debris. Next slide. Other areas of concern that were noted were areas identified as unauthorized dumping areas, shotgun proofing area, former trap sand piles, other non-demolition debris areas, and also what we would be considering a potential area of concern are the ponds themselves. Next slide. This is the aerial photograph that shows the approximate location of the brick bunkers. So you can pretty much see that the entire site needs to receive some level of evaluation based on the extensive site history. Next slide. So, 2023 investigation. It was pretty much performed to support and confirm data from that was collected back in the 1980s and 1990s. And reason for this is that the data is just too old at this point. You have data that's 20 to 40 years old, and in order for it to be compared to today's standards, additional data would need to be collected. There's been so many advances in investigation and laboratory technology that the old information just doesn't compare well. So once they go and collect the new data through the 2023 investigation, that could be compared to the current remediation standards that in which we identify as the remediation standard regulations. And once they receive those results, we can begin to evaluate how much of the property is still impacted and how much contamination still remains on site. This is all with the goal of developing a 3-dimensional model, something that's really needed at this time to be able to develop an appropriate remedial action plan. Next slide. So this is just a photograph of the Pine Swamp property again, and showing the areas that were part of the 2023 investigation. You can see they match up pretty well with what was in the 1986 consent order that the department has with Olin. Next slide. So what did the 23 investigation do for us, or just do in general? So Olin was able to collect the data and identify and delineate the wetlands. They were able to inspect 46 existing monitor wells on the property to see whether or not the wells were still usable or whether or not they had to be replaced. They were able to deploy 50 soil vapor sampling points. They collected approximately 100 soil boring samples. They installed 11 new monitoring wells. They sampled all monitoring wells that were available to them, and then they were able to evaluate the results and compare them to the remediation standard regulations. Next slide. So really in brief summary of the 2023 investigations, what we found was there's still contamination in every one of the areas that Olin went out and investigated. To some degree, they were able to find some sort of a component that was at levels exceeding our current standards, either in the soil or the water. So they were able to at least confirm that the areas that were believed to be contaminated still are. Next slide. Now, I really can't get into the great specifics of the 2023 investigation. There's really a considerable amount of information there. All of this, just to let you know, all of this information is available to the public. Anybody who wants to take a look at the report can do so at the below link. One of the things that I usually tell people is the best way to find this link, instead of writing it down, is I just do a simple internet search for CTDEP record search. That's how I access our own files myself, and it usually comes up as the first option. And once you enter our search portal, you can go to the next slide. You'll see a page like this. And what the information I'm going to provide you is less is better. So basically, the only things you need to do in order to find a report is enter the fields in those 4 locations, which is the town of Hamden and the street address. So the street address for this property is listed as 475 Putnam. It's really Putnam Ave, but don't put in Putnam Ave Road or anything like that, just 475 Putnam. Now the date range below, that's just to kind of narrow the search. The report was completed on the 10th, or submitted to us on the 10th of 2024 of May. So if you put a date range of 5/1/2024 through 5/15, it's going to give you the following result. Next slide. It's going to give you these 2 options. So you'll see 2 reports here, but for some reason, it's the exact same report. I don't know why it's entered twice into our system, but it is the exact same report. So you can go to either one if you wish. I'm just going to give another real quick warning, is that the report in its entirety, and this is why we can't email it to people or anything like that, is that it's 3,500 pages long. However, the important information that you need is really within the first 150 pages. The remainder of the report is all supporting data from Olin and their laboratory analysis. So it's really, unless you really like getting into laboratory reports, you can do so, but it's really about the first 150 pages. The report has extensive amount of maps on it, and it's going to show you exactly where the sampling locations were. It can give you concentrations of what contaminants were found and at what locations. Next slide. So after the 2023 investigation, it concluded that just simply not enough data to the property exists for to properly create the model in order to develop an appropriate remedial action work plan. So at least Olin has some good data to start with, and I guess you could say, well, where did they go from here? So Olin developed a second work plan for an additional investigation to occur in 2025. Now, the focus of that is for Olin to further delineate known impacted areas associated with the 86 consent order, which they already did back in 2023. It's just to further fine tune some of their results. Olin also plans to begin assessing the potential areas of concern outside the consent order. So besides those 5 main focus areas, they're looking to go beyond that and begin to assess whether or not the potential areas are of concern. They're going to do that through visual observations, surface and subsurface sampling, and also through groundwater sampling and through installation of additional monitor wells. Another thing Olin plans to do is begin the evaluation of the pond systems themselves by collecting and evaluating surface water samples. And one final thing that Olin, it's not on this slide, but one final thing that Olin is looking to do is to, they indicated that they'll be looking at a structural review of the property, looking at the bridges and roads. And this is for them to enable access portions of the property that may be contaminated or may need some additional investigation. So we received word that some of the bridges and roads may be in disrepair. They may have to do some work on those structures in order for them to be able to access the properties and collect the information that they need. Next slide. So Olin went ahead and developed a work plan, submitted it to the department for review back in October of 2024. The department reviewed it. I believe Six Lakes also had an opportunity to take a look at it and provided a little bit of feedback. Olin revised their work plan, resubmitted it, and it was eventually approved in December of 2024. Then they went ahead and submitted a schedule for 2025, which was eventually also approved on December 23rd. Next slide. So what is their schedule? So their schedule basically indicated that as of February 2025, that they were going to complete their investigation activity planning. They were going to obtain necessary permits and laboratory coordination, as well as scheduling their subcontractors to do the work. They planned on going out by March of 2025 to initiate the on-site investigative activity. They were planning on completing their groundwater sampling of available groundwater monitor wells by May of 2025. They anticipate submitting draft of their investigation report in August, and then submitting the final version of their investigation report in October of 2025. So far, Olin has indicated that they're on schedule and they plan on submitting the anticipated drafts and final reports on time as well. Next slide. So if somebody is also really interested in getting into the fine details of the work plan, they can find that also on our DEP record search website, which I previously provided. Same link, same internet search. Go ahead, next slide. The only difference in this is that after you submit or after you complete the fields for the town and the address, you could just modify the date range on the bottom, and you just put no date at the second portion, and that will give you every document that was submitted to the department for over this past year. You should easily be able to identify the work plan that was approved in December. So one other thing I'll say too, if somebody's really interested in looking at the historic documentation that was provided by this site, you can just put in note date range at the bottom, and it's going to give you all of the information and all of the documentation that we actually have in our possession. Approximately about 3 to 5 years ago, all of our records were digitized. So the only problem is that if there is a report that's older than 5 years old, there's a good chance that it's not going to be in chronological order. The information is there online and everybody can look at it, It's just not going to be in chronological order, so you might have to hunt around a little bit for that document that you want to see. Go ahead to the next slide. So that's pretty much it. I guess we're available to answer any questions. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see our contact information. So if you're not able to get any questions answered today, you have our contact information up there available for, direct contact if you feel you need to.
Thank you so much, John. That's a ton of information in a short period of time. So we had a question about annexter. If you could, John, if you could say something more about what that term means. Is that the name of a company, or what is that area of concern? Why is it called annexter?
I don't know. I'm going to say it was historically called annexter, and when I received the project, so I went with it. I do know it was a piece of property that was actually once sold off, but it was repurchased by Olin. I want to say back in like the early 80s. So I'm not exactly sure why it's called the annexter.
Mark, do you have any idea?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of Googling on that, and I don't think I came up with a definitive answer either. It might be that I had the information and it just slipped from me. It's possible that some of the local folks in Hamden, being residents, may have a better idea of annexter and why it was called that. And I also have to point out that I forgot to say this at the beginning. We're going to share these slides with the coalition, and Kathy told me that the slides are going to be put up on the coalition's website. That may take a couple of days for that process to happen, but it will happen. And all of you should feel free to reach out to John or to me if you have questions after this investigation. We've been thinking about this for a while. And we also have up on this slide Ray Frigon, who a lot of you know from previous meetings. He's our division director. Ray just unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but John and I are closer here.
Great.
Ray
Thank you,
may
guys.
actually have the answer for the annexter though.
We'll ask him, and actually we send out a
Yeah.
monthly newsletter. So if we get the answer to that, we can share it in the newsletter. And that's
Okay.
actually a good moment to mention that if anyone wants to sign up to receive our monthly newsletter from the Six Lakes Park Coalition, you can do that on our website. And Killian has just dropped in the chat all of the links to get that information. And it looks like Anstris has added, there's a company called Annexter with current locations in Milford and Cheshire and other places out of state. So there's likely some connection, but we don't know. These are historical names back from the consent order in 1986. So yeah, so we'll see what we can find out about that. I also have some pre-submitted questions here from someone who is asking, and this may be premature because these are sort of remediation questions, but she's asking what methods will be used to remove or contain the identified chemicals or contaminants from the Six Lakes area. Are you able to say anything in general about remediation methods at this point?
Yeah, I can
Well,
talk
Kathy,
about.
go for it.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, Kathy is right in pointing out it's a little bit premature to say exactly what is going to be done to in general so far. And John, please feel free to jump in. The massively contaminated areas, it very often in areas things can be covered up either with soil or other what the site is finally used for. Some of that will depend on what the site is ultimately used for. Great desire on the part of the coalition to see this preserve this open space, and if that is the case, very likely that maybe some areas that there are higher amounts of contamination, that material might have to be removed and disposed of off-site.
Yeah, sure. So I think what Mark's saying is that, for this specific site, it is a little bit premature to indicate how exactly they're going to remediate it. I think he was saying ultimately it depends on what the property is going to be used for as future use. Some of the areas that are heavily contaminated, there may be required to remove some of the contaminants and cover with clean soil. There might be other areas that may be left alone. Um, and it just, it depends on what it is too. So if it's something that can be kind of like locked in place, they might be able to lock it in place. Um, if it's something that's like, it's just not moving, it's immobile. Like the same thing, it can be staying there. But for the most part, if it's something that can be directly um, in direct contact with human, that would probably have to be removed.
Great.
If
Thank
we're
you.
looking at water as well, water can be, treated in site depending on what it is. It can be also removed and cleaned, that type of thing.
Great, thank you. We have a question here from Brad. Given the goal of turning the site into a park, is the investigation now underway sufficient to know where cleanup might need to take place to meet that goal?
Yeah, for this investigation, it's pretty much all encompassing. The investigation that's being performed is going to be sufficient to be able to get it to whatever purpose it eventually becomes. It's just a matter of finally, or at a point, they're going to have to come to some sort of a conclusion or a goal to get to, because the cleanup levels and standards are different. Right now, their requirement is to clean to industrial commercial, but they do have the option to clean down to residential. And we do have new regulations that have just come out and will take effect next year, which is called passive recreation. So it's a little bit something in between the industrial and the residential standards. So, but as far as the investigation, that's all the same at this point.
And just following up on that, Carol is asking, do we have any idea if Olin is willing to consider to remediate it to be used as a park?
I'm going to have to say Olin is very open to all ideas. And I think they're going to continue doing some additional investigation work to see exactly what they have out there. And it's just going to be determined in the future what's going to happen. But they have indicated they are very much open to all ideas at this point.
And we should say that maybe you could clarify for everybody what your role is versus some of the other folks at Deep who may be involved in this project in different from different aspects. For
Well, I'll
example, the
say
folks on the park side.
Okay, so basically our role is pretty much just working with Olin to get the site investigated and remediated to whichever standard is chosen. As far as what happens with the property in the future, whether it becomes a park or anything like that, that's really beyond our scope. Like our scope is specific to just getting it remediated to the current standards that we have in the regulation. Do you have any
Carol,
more on that, Mark? I don't know if Mark wants to comment on that as well. No.
Can you hear me?
yeah,
Yep.
we can.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on my speaker on my phone. That seems to work better. John, I agree with you that the remediation division's role is whenever a final use for this site is decided, we will work with the coalition, the community, or whoever ultimately ends up working on this site to get the site cleaned up to the level that is appropriate for its intended end use. And I should also say that when the investigation is completed and we get the report later this fall, we have committed to doing another face-to-face meeting with the community. Can't say exactly when that's going to be, because it'll take us a couple of weeks to a month or so to look at the report and evaluate it before we'll be prepared to speak to the community about what its results are.
Great, thank you. Yes, and we'll be letting everybody know once that's scheduled, and we're looking forward to seeing you in person again in the fall to do that. Carol was also following up with the question, will they be testing the soil at the bottom of the ponds as part of this current testing protocol?
Yeah, so based on the size of the property in which you've seen, it's really an extensive piece of property. So it's really going to be like a very much phased approach. At this point, we're looking at the known areas of concern that are associated with the consent order. But as you can see, we're starting to branch out. We're at least testing the water to see what the surface water is like. And then eventually we will be sampling the sediment from the ponds.
And so on the subject of water, David is asking, how does the proximity to the public water supply, which is Lake Whitney, so Six Lakes flows into Lake Whitney, how does that
Yes.
impact the deep analysis and the project?
So historically, we do have some water data of the water that's leaving the Pine Swamp property into the Lake Whitney system, and it showed that there wasn't any impacts coming surface wise across. So we didn't have any. We don't have any data indicating that there's a negative impacts migrating off the property. And that's another reason why we're having Olin go back and do the pond evaluation, just to assure that there's nothing continuing to migrate off the property.
I also have a question here that came in earlier. Who is responsible financially for the current and all future issues related to the contamination and remediation of Six Lakes? Is it ever possible for this responsibility to shift onto the state or the local town? And I don't know if this is something that you all can address, but I'm sure a lot of people are wondering how the money works.
Yeah, no, that's a
I'll
fair
let Mark
question.
jump on that.
Yeah, okay. That's a fair question. And the answer is Olin, as the owner of the property, is responsible for assessing and cleaning the site up. And that is under the 1986 consent order, which we have been working with them on. And quite honestly, even if Olin was to sell the property to somebody else, they could remain responsible. Whoever acquired the property from them, whether it was sold or donated, the new entity would also be responsible, but the responsibility for cleaning up site is called joint and several. What that means is Olin would not escape responsibility even if they transferred the site to some other entity. Olin and anybody else in the chain of title that currently or in the past owned the property would be responsible. But Olin obviously has the financial resources to investigate the site and hopefully eventually clean it up to whatever use is decided for it.
So Carol also asks, Justin, I'm going to toss this question to you. Carol says, so who will push beyond Deep's role?
Well, that would be us. And us, I am using the royal we, being the Six Lakes Park Coalition, being the community, being the mayor's office, right, collectively to work with our partners at Deep to get, to a point where we're making sure that the property is cleaned up to an appropriate level that's safe for community members under whatever the end use will be. And our hopes and goals, aspirations is that that's going to be for community use. The other thing is, for us to continue to organize being community like this to make that happen. We have been in contact with Olin. Olin is aware of our goals and aspirations, and from the conversations I've had with them, we haven't gotten a no. And so a not no to me is a yes. And so it's really a waiting game at this point.
So, go ahead.
Real quickly, yeah, I think what you just said is really important. We have to remain neutral So our job is to make sure the site is assessed and cleaned up properly. We have to remain neutral to particular use, but you all as the community, you can do that.
And I will add that we've been really fortunate to have a lot of support from our elected officials, and we want to keep letting them know that this property is important to us. And Senator Looney in particular has been very supportive. Mayor Garrett has been very supportive. So we want to keep letting our both state and local officials and federal actually. Senator Murphy sent an aide to our vision report launch in December as well. So we want to keep letting our elected officials know that this is important to us as well, because they play a role here too. So we are right at 6:45, and I see one more question here, and then we'll wrap things up. So Brad is asking, any suggestions on how to advocate in a useful way? Justin, that one's probably for you too.
Yeah, we're going to be doing this summer, we're going to be doing more door knocking, talking to our new hall community members to get a fuller picture of what if this property, if when this property gets cleaned up, we want to have consensus around the community about what it should look like, how it should be. And so we're going to be doing those efforts. So if you're not already signed up for the newsletter, that's in the chat. Please do, and feel free to reach out to us. And we're thinking we have plenty of groups working within the steering committee, thinking about land acquisition, thinking about long-term responsibilities around maintenance of the property. And we're also thinking about local ways to interact and reach out. So feel free to connect with us. And should I wrap us up?
You know what? I'm just curious whether Mark or John wants to jump in on that question as well before we finally say goodbye. Do you two working for the state of Connecticut have any additional thoughts about advocacy and what's effective and useful?
I would say that just that the most effective people who speak for what's going to happen in the community is the people in the community themselves. And I found a lot of projects, what's common, what is in common for all successful projects is there's an effective leader in the community. And sometimes that's a political leader or the mayor or somebody. And sometimes it's just a community member, somebody like Justin that is passionate and is standing up and saying, hey, community, let's come to agreement, first of all, on what we want this site to be. And once we decide that, and that may take some working to build a consensus, I would encourage you to work together to build that consensus. And then once that happens, that leader's job is to kind of just keep pushing. And don't be afraid to, how can I say this, be the grain of sand that makes an oyster.
Take us out, Justin.
Yeah, we are planting the seeds of change so that we can grow together. And I just want to thank everybody for their time, for being in community with us tonight. It's very, very important. It shows that this project is important to the community. It shows it to Deep, it shows it to Olin, and it shows it to each other. So thank you very much for coming out. I'd be remiss not to mention that Representative Sweet has joined us, has been on with us. So I missed them earlier and just want to acknowledge them and all the hard work they've been doing on this project to that end. So thank you very much. Stay in touch, and thank you, Mark and John, for your time.
You're welcome.
So very glad to be here.
Thanks.
Here.
Safe travels, everyone.